How do we navigate the unavoidable and often incomprehensible canyon between objective truth and psychological truth? The secret is clarity, and clarity of the unconscious mind in particular. Decades of psychological research have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the unconscious mind speaks through the language of symbols and storylines, which makes the question of past life memories an incredibly complex and often distressing area of human experience. Fortunately, it ultimately does not matter whether you believe in the objective, confirmable reality of reincarnation, as long as you're willing to temporarily endure that tension of uncertainty and psychological possibility that a past life may indeed be a psychological truth. In this episode of Inner Work Essentials, I'm going to be giving you an advanced and hopefully very practical understanding of how to work with past life memories, not based just on my own personal experience or my client experience. I'm not a professional past life therapist, but I do know someone who is. Roger Woolger, Jungian psychotherapist. This is a 30-year-old book, which is well worth a place on your bookshelf. Other lives, other selves. I'm going to dive straight in this episode of Inner Work Essentials to a beautiful quote which captures the essence of today's conversation, because in this video, I'm going to hopefully, fingers crossed, allow you to work within that uncertain realm between truth and maybe not truth without getting compulsively fixated on what might be a delusion or a projection or some wishful fantasy thinking which actually leads you astray, or at worse, this is a huge shadow that I see in the past life memory space, may actually become a form of limiting belief or self-restricting identity construct where you stop doing certain things because of your past life. It's going to be a pretty intense conversation today, but let's frame it with Roger Woolger, Other Lives, Other Selves, and a direct quote about his multiple decades of experience leading people through past life work with a therapeutic intention. Quote from the book: "The debate about whether past life stories are actually memories, the literalist view, or whether they are truly fantasies will doubtless continue for many years to come. On the whole, the psychoanalytic schools deriving from Freud and Jung have inclined toward the fantasy view, while hypnotherapists have tended more towards the idea that these stories literally happened. Roger Woolger says that his position is somewhere in the middle. He believes that the unconscious produces all kinds of fantasies, quote, which are attempts to resolve psychic conflicts on a symbolic level. Mostly, as with dreams, fantasy products are highly condensed and require delicate unraveling to be fully understood. A single dream, for example, may contain elements from 2 or 3 periods of a person's life: childhood, adolescence, current life, all wound around one specific complex which has an archetypal theme underlying it." End of the quote now. But just as dreams and fantasies contain elements from this life, i.e. memory traces of actual events, I believe that fragmentary memories from past lives are also woven into them. I highly recommend you read this book. This is the single best book on the therapeutic approach to reincarnation and past lives I've encountered in many hundreds of books. Not actually on this topic, that's an exaggeration, but it comes up very, very often, this question of past lives, especially within the New Age circles. Roger Woolger is truly the expert to look towards, because he has this awareness of the symbolic importance and the therapeutic importance of treating a past life as if it were real, even if it may not be real. This is actually what Carl Jung called a healing fiction. So it's a realistic, maybe real, but at the very least realistic way of going into a certain emotional experience which is yet to be unblocked through trauma work or parts work of one sort or another, and it becomes a very powerful story, which we can't turn away from. The challenge with past life work is that it's often very spontaneous. I myself went through a period about 5 years ago where I started to get a lot of dreams and a lot of waking spontaneous visions that all revolved around a single life theme, a certain character in a certain period of time with a certain type of death. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the theme was being hung for speaking up. That was my past life story. Came through over the course of multiple years. It's incredibly well fleshed out, but at the time, because I was a lot more destabilized by these kinds of visions, I didn't truly understand the nature of psychological projection and the downsides of having a very creative imagination. I got a little bit destabilized. This is actually what John Ware Perry would call the trial of the visionary mind. He's also written this beautiful book, The Far Side of Madness. This is a beautiful, beautiful twin combination approach to the whole concept of spiritual emergency as a psychically renewing process. Past lives definitely fit into this category. I recommend that you read those books as well. For myself, I was fortunate that I had enough of my feet on the ground to be able to integrate past lives in a way where I suppose I could go off into the realm, but I was still training. I wasn't doing drugs or drinking. I've been sober for many years, so I didn't get too caught up in the narrative and actually quite enjoy this existence as Jordan. I'm not in a rush to go somewhere else. But past lives, if they're not treated appropriately, can potentially become a spiritual bypass, which actually leads us away from the trauma-based reality from which they can sometimes emerge. Let me unpack that a little bit. I'll frame a question to you. What's the difference between a spontaneous past life memory and a spontaneous remembering of repressed childhood trauma? Maybe not so much. Oftentimes when I'm working with people in a one-to-one private therapeutic mentorship situation, there will be not always a past life theme, but very often a repressed childhood memory theme, where they'll realize that their family life may not be as idyllic, or even actually far worse than they imagined it to be. There'll be a certain memory, maybe even from a younger period of time, maybe from age 2, or even in the womb. This is prenatal psychology, and we work with it in the session. But to work with it in a place when someone's very triggered, and someone's really feeling the visceral nature of what might be a deeply disturbing, horrific experience, you have to be able to hold this tension of certainty and uncertainty. You can't go too deep and take too much authentic acceptance of a sudden vision that emerges in a therapeutic setting, because you might go astray. For example, someone suddenly remembers that they may have been abused when they were in the crib. Horrific, awful. But is it true? It's a really challenging place to be. It might be true, but what's more important for me as someone who's supporting someone in that initial dysregulated state is to treat it as if it were true. It's a psychological truth. It's the healing fiction and the healing fact. It could be, it might not be. You have to work with uncertainty, and this is the nature of memory. Past life memory is very much an extension of that. If you want to go down the theosophical, more religious avenue where we talk about the eternal validity of the soul incarnating time and time again on its journey through form and flesh, when does the past life memory appear? It usually appears in combination, in union with a lot of early childhood memory unblocking of one sort or another. For myself, for example, this past life where I was hung from a tree that kept coming up again and again. I'm not saying it's true or it was false, let's say it's a healing fiction. That was very much a time where I was learning to speak up. And ironically right now, even just tapping into it, my voice constricts a little bit. It's not just because my mouth's dry, it's still there. It's still something I'm working on. It may appear that in these videos I'm a very natural and charismatic speaker, but I was not always that way. The past life mirrors the current life in terms of challenges and healing trajectory, and this is a psychological truth that really allows us to discern truth from trickery when it comes to using a past life perspective of the inner work as a way to propel yourself forwards and dissolve the blockages of the past. Roger Woolger is a fantastic therapist to turn towards. Again, I highly recommend that you read Other Lives, Other Selves. I've recommended this to clients who went through a spontaneous past life remembering, or a vision, or something came through in maybe a guided meditation, or if I was leading an active imagination, and they follow up in their own time, which is what I always expect from clients. You know, a lot of reading if you're working with me, but they follow up in their own time, and as they're reading the stories through the pages, they then come back to me in the following week, and they've got more unlocks. They saw their truth reflected in the truth of someone who wrote about their truth 30 years ago, and suddenly there's an opening in the heart. The noose, metaphorically speaking, is a little bit limper around their neck. And then another week goes by and they read some more stories. Maybe they read John Perry and they realize that they're going through an emergence process, and they don't get as destabilized as they probably would be without the psychoeducation element, where they're willing to treat their truth as total but partial. This is actually a very key concept within transpersonal psychology as a whole. It's to be skeptical of your intuition and to understand that intuition, as I have said time and time again in the series, can only pour through a vessel which can hold it and filter it. And if your vessel is clogged up with trauma or unresolved issues, it is the equivalent of having a mossy, dirty, trash-filled pipe which doesn't allow intuition to pour through clearly, and when it's on the other side, it's going to be muddied and brown and not very insightful at all. The past life memory, from that perspective, is something which is simultaneously unblocking, but also indicative of the work which is yet to be done. I've worked with people who've had past life memories of being stabbed in their womb, for example, and being killed while they've been pregnant. It's not too many steps away from their current challenges in regards to their sexual healing. Other people have had past life memories where they've, obviously, I don't want to make anyone public in their deeply personal experience, but I'll make something up just to protect privacy. People who've had past life memories around any form of somatic complaint will usually reflect the same somatic complaint in just a new symbolic form where they have more attention. Maybe it's not best to go into specific examples. I think I've already labored the point. If you have a past life that you're thinking of and working with currently, you can probably relate that to a present experience or a childhood experience, which is still seeking completion. So where does this leave us in regards to a practical step to working with a past life and discerning truth from trickery? The number one invitation is simply spaciousness. It's being okay with not knowing whether it's true or it's delusion, and understand that the unconscious mind speaks through symbols and storylines which magnetize and condense our attention around particular themes, sometimes archetypal themes or archetypal stories such as the wounded healer. I mean, for myself, that past life story there of the wounded healer who was killed for speaking his truth. That's very motivating at a certain period where I'm going through career transition and lifestyle transition, to encourage me to do what you're seeing me do right now. Was it a past life? Am I reincarnated to bring forwards the information that I couldn't share back then? I don't know. You may think so. I may think so. Millions of people may not agree with the concept at all, but it doesn't matter. We don't need to defend our past life story as if it were a precious baby that we need to cling to have a sense of identity as our current egoic personality or persona construct. We can take and appreciate these different stories while still laughing at the fact that almost every person, at one form or another, when they go through past life work, thinks that they were an ancient Egyptian priestess, or they were a Knights Templar, or they were Napoleon, or they were Jesus, or they were a World War I soldier. There are very common themes that come through, but how many women really were Cleopatra in a past life? There's only one Cleopatra, and yet you'll see hundreds of thousands of people who hold that belief in their heart that they really were. That's delusional grandiosity, but also it's a psychological truth that they're trying to be a more powerful feminine being, and they associate the imagery that's stored in their subconscious. And there's many ways to look at it. I'm not trying to dogmatically program your mind into believing one story or another. I'm encouraging you to think for yourself, to clear out the trauma in your pipe, and receive intuition with greater degrees of clarity in correspondence to the level of consistency and the level of clarity that you keep pouring into your inner work process. If you have several past lives that you're working with right now, treat them as true but partial. You can have a religious, faith-based structure that keeps you moving forwards in life. I personally lean towards the psychological and objective measurable truth of reincarnation, but I don't know for sure. And I think that's really the human experience in a nutshell. We can't truly know for sure. Some people would disagree with me, but I like to lean back just a little bit and keep that skepticism fresh. If you're interested in taking this topic to a very related perspective, well, join me over on the next episode of Inner Work Essentials, where we're going to continue the New Age debunking with the most powerful, and I mean most powerful book that I've ever read on astrology, Richard Tarnas's magnum opus, Cosmos and Psyche, which shows us how all of human history is actually dictated by the planets and stars. I've got a history degree, and I found it incredibly skeptical to begin with, but having read it, there's a lot of truth in there, and it's a very interesting conversation. So join me over there, and I'll see you over there.